The most common myths that are told to new photographers has to do with camera gear. In this episode, I'll dispel the myth about what you're told about upgrading your camera and why it has very little to do with becoming a better photographer. Welcome to Photo Mentor Minutes. In this series, I share decades of real-world experience as a commercial photographer and mentor to help you to see like an artist. In the previous episode, I outlined the biggest myths told to new photographers, and that was you had to shoot on manual. I encourage you to check the link here or in below and watch that episode as well. Before I dive in, though, I want to give you a gift to show my appreciation for your support. You guys have been great. So, look, I know how difficult it is to get attention when you post your images in social media. So what I've done is I've created over 40 graphical frames that you can download for free that'll make your images really stand out. These include both portrait, landscape, and square formats, so they'll go with just about any image. If you want to download them, go to photomentoracademy.com/frames to get your copy. Now, look, I also know you're not everyone's a Photoshop wizard. So to make these easy to use, I created multiple video tutorials showing you how to use these frames with free sites like canva.com, as well as Photoshop, of course. So, photomentoracademy.com/frames to get your copy, and I know these are going to turn your ordinary images into extraordinary ones. In this episode, I'm going to address the second biggest myth told to new photographers, and that is your camera is the problem of why you're not improving. Let me ask you, does any of these sound familiar to you? You need to upgrade to a better camera. This is the one that's most frustrating comment I see. On average, I guess maybe 75% of the time, when you ask a question on a social media platform, the answer is going to be a technical response, unfortunately. The answers are often things like, you need to upgrade to full frame sensor, or buy a 50mm f1.8 nifty 50. Then they'll proceed to post one of the images they shot, and of course this makes me laugh. It makes no sense, because number one, they don't know anything about your type of photography. The second reason is the subject's, the location on Earth, the time of day, the time of year, the camera, the settings all have an effect on the image. So posting their photo with their settings is a really zero value. In fact, every camera and lens manufacturer posts samples on their website, so why not just go look there? Then there's the post that justifies their decision of why you should upgrade to a new $3,000 DSLR or mirrorless camera. If they own a Canon, Nikon, or Sony, they'll go into why it's the best decision they ever made. The problem is, instead of sounding like photographers, unfortunately, they sound like they're interviewing for a sales position at Canon, Nikon, or Sony. Of course, they post an image or two, and the sad part is the images are nice and sharp, but they're the same boring images they were shooting before they upgraded. Yes, the camera was a technical upgrade, but it did nothing to really provide them with the real tool they really needed, which was creativity. Here's something you won't hear, by the way. Rarely do they ask any questions about your photography, such as type of photography you shoot, how long you've been shooting, or what other solutions you've tried. In other words, they're not really attempting to solve your problem. They just want to tell you what to buy. So, then what's the answer? Should you upgrade or not? Well, look, without knowing more about your specific situation, I can't say yes or no. But here's some advice I can put my reputation behind. Number one, upgrading to new technology can often be motivational. We can use that to improve our skills and education. But caution, you need to set proper expectations. For example, a common issue new photographers have is getting their images sharp. Manufacturers are in the business selling camera gear, right? So they're pitching you on a new focusing system and promise it's going to solve all your focusing problems. The next question you need to ask is, how much will I improve if I upgrade? It's important to separate the need from the want. Now look, sometimes I just want a new lens. I don't need it, but so I understand the desire. If you're a working photographer, here's a business question you need to ask yourself. If I spend $1 on this upgrade, will it get me more business or can I charge more? I can speak from personal experience that no amount of gear will make you a better photographer. There are many times when I've upgraded camera, lenses, and lighting only to discover that there was a defective bonehead behind the camera pushing the button. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, I can say this over and over, but most of you will ignore my advice. And I understand why. It's a little like someone telling you that money will not make you happy, but most of us would agree. We wouldn't mind being wealthy to try it for ourselves, would we? It's the same for new gear. Intellectually, we know it won't make us more creative, but emotionally, it makes us feel better. So we upgrade anyway. Look, I get that we all want the latest and greatest gear. This makes photography fun, exciting, and who doesn't want to see what they can do with a new lens or a new piece of gear, right? Unfortunately, here's what you're going to discover. Getting a new lens or camera might improve the technical quality of your images, but the reality is no one cares about this except other photographers. Your friends, your family, and your clients could care less. They only care about one thing: results. They're not impressed, and they don't care, and they don't have a clue whether your camera costs $50,000 or $500, or whether it's full frame or crop sensor, or whether the aperture on the lens is 2.8 or f1.2. This doesn't hit home, though, until you scrape together $2,700 on a new lens, and when you're reviewing the proofs, you look at this and you say to yourself, crap, my images still suck. Or the number of keepers that you're getting out of this new gear is no more than you got before. What do we do? To hide the disappointment, of course, we justify the purchase. We say ooh and ah, and we look at the sharpness or the color or the bokeh. And if we're honest with ourselves, we quickly realize the lens was a step, but not the improvement we were hoping for. To prove my point, look at the few examples here. Hopefully you'll get what I mean. This first image was shot by Skylar. She's a new photographer who I've been mentoring. What makes this image so impressive is that it has a number of compositional elements and tells a story. Now, was this shot on a crop sensor, full frame? Was it shot on a top-of-the-line Nikon Z9 or a Canon R3? This sticking with the fog theme, by the way, let's look at this next image, which is an award-winning image, and it's called Fog on the Path. The detail, the range of colors in the image is very impressive. What camera lens was this shot on? Do you know? And hopefully you're starting to see a theme here, and that is that these images all have one thing in common: creativity. In the final example, the lighting, the gray tone values in this award-winning image definitely shows off the technical capabilities of the camera, but it has very little to do with the camera. It's the composition and the creativity of the photographer is what makes this image work. Wouldn't you agree? Would you be proud to have any of these in your portfolio? I would. You starting to see my point here? Oh, by the way, did I forget to tell you that every one of these was shot with an iPhone? As I mentioned before, I get it. As a commercial photographer, I have collected more gear than I could possibly use. So I am speaking from my own experience. When Leica loaned me a $20,000 medium format camera with a $12,000 30 to 90 millimeter lens, it did not make me a better photographer. It was a great system. I loved using it, but it didn't make me more creative. Occasionally, I would have a student assist me on a commercial or a magazine assignment. And what was interesting is the most common questions they asked were not about cameras, lightings, or gear, but on technique. Why I shot something this way or that way, or why I asked the client this or that. It was this experience and many others when I realized the old school way of teaching exposure triangles, shooting on manual mode, didn't make sense with modern camera technology. This is when I developed the STEPS methodology. And the results were amazing. They were immediate. And that's what kind of shocked me, to be honest with you. So, I think you need to ask yourself these questions. Number one, why do you want to be a photographer? Number two, do you understand the elements of composition and why they're important? Have you ever heard of the 7 elements of art? Has anyone ever shown you how to use the language of visual grammar to tell a story? Until you start to answer these questions, the camera, the sharpness, the bokeh, the lens, the size of the sensor are meaningless. The famous landscape photographer Ansel Adams said it best: "There's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept." I love that quote. My goal is to teach you to learn to see like an artist, and by starting with the creative aspects of photography, this has resulted in new photographers becoming more creative and more competent, much faster than the system I was taught by instructors from Kodak. The system is STEPS. It stands for seeing, telling, exposing, processing, and of course, success. The reason it starts with seeing is the ability to see a potential image and understand the light and how it affects the image is critical to your unique vision as a photographer. In fact, you don't even need a camera to practice this part of the creative process. The T stands for telling or storytelling. It's your job to tell the viewer what's the most important element in the frame. And using this visual language is how you accomplish that. When a magazine editor looks over the selects I sent in for an assignment, they don't care about my camera, the lighting, or what mode I shot it on. They are only interested in, do these images help reinforce or tell the story of the article? Now look, if this is too subtle, let me put a fine point on it. Gear is great, but without a vision and the ability to tell a story, the images are just pretty pixels. If you can afford to upgrade, great. But be forewarned, your images will still suck until you first understand the visual grammar of art. And finally, photographers have been creating amazing images with the most basic equipment. So if you're struggling with your camera, chances are it's not the gear. Now look, every week I end the episode of Photo Mentor Minutes with a quote. And it's a quote I came up with, and you probably don't even understand it, but maybe you're starting to catch on. And that is, if you want to be a more successful photographer, quit trying to learn photography and learn the language of visual storytelling. I know it might not seem like it right now because the technology might be overwhelming and getting in the way. But trust my experience when I say I can teach anyone the technology. It is learning to see and be more creative that's the hard part. If you want more information on this, on the STEPS program, you can go to photomentoracademy.com/steps. As always, thank you for your support, your questions. I read every comment. So please, if you have a question, leave it below. I'd be happy to answer it. And thanks again.